Hello, everybody. Welcome to the final DivKid discussion from Machina Bristronica with Tom from Thing Modular. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very honoured to be on the DivKid sofa.
Ah, well, it's not my sofa. I don't get to take it home at the end. I believe it was freshly unwrapped for this weekend.
It's
I missed
beautiful.
I would have liked to peel the plastic. I didn't get to do that. So we're going to kind of centre our discussion around the workshop system. But just kind of, let's race through a bit of history prior to that. Kind of, where were you and what were you doing as you got into kind of developing the Turing machine, which was your first release?
Back at the start, so I was working at the Times newspaper, and I'd done bits and pieces of sort of Arduino. I'd made some guitar pedals, and I went to an event in South London with a couple of friends, one of whom was here yesterday. And they sort of introduced this idea of Eurorack and modular synths. And one of them said to me, "You do this DIY stuff. You could do that DIY stuff in modular synth world, and that would be fun. People would like that." And so I started doing that. I designed this kind of sequencer, this sort of random sequencer, very much based on lots of other older designs, sort of the Booker 266 and the weird noise ring and stuff. And put it out as a open source design. So I kind of published it to say, here's the circuit board, here's the parts, here's the laser cut front panel, and just put that out into the world and said, if you want to do this, you can make this. And within about 3 or 4 hours, a guy who I vaguely knew popped up this was on Modwiggler back in the day, and said, "Oh, I'll do a group buy. I'll buy those parts, and then I can sell these as a kit." I was like, "That's interesting. That's great." I didn't have that idea. And that guy was Steve, who now runs Thonk, and it became Thonk. The business kind of grew out of that. So I had this kind of way of designing things, and then a way of getting them out to an audience. So the relationship with Thonk meant it was very much like a kind of record label, I've never been on a record label, but that's what I'm told. I would kind of come up with something and then give Thonk a call and give Steve a call and say, "I made this kind of thing." And he'd say, "Oh, great, let's make 250 of them." I'd be like, "It's a bit weird. I don't know if really you're going to want 250 of them." But he'd make some, he'd put them out, I'd get some royalties for what was sold. And then so that was over sort of 12 years or so, that sort of grew, and the Turing machine was successful, radio music was successful, microphony, the contact mic module was successful. So that kind of grew as a side project, basically. That was a kind of hobby with benefits.
Yeah, it sounds like it allows you to just do the bits you maybe enjoy.
Absolutely, exactly that. I didn't want to set up a business doing shipping, doing customer service, doing all those kind of things. And Steve turned out to be brilliant at that and brilliant at hiring people to do that well and kind of leading those people.
Yeah.
So it's been really nice for me to see his success, which I'm a small part of, contributing to that.
Yeah. So we race forward from individual modules and ideas to a system.
Yeah, so I'd done that as a kind of hobby, as a side project, and then about 2.5 years ago, I was asked to do this retreat in Cornwall. Someone said, "Can you come to Cornwall, spend with a bunch of people, spend 5 days doing kind of graphic scores, doing sort of modular synth music there, to just host that for people?" And I said, "Well, that sounds great. Sounds like a nice idea to go to Cornwall and do that." And as I was planning that with Dion, who runs those events, the question came up of, well, what are those people going to play when they come? Are we going to somehow buy like 12 modular synths for them to play? Are they going to have to bring their own stuff, which means they have to already be quite established? And I'd wanted to make something sort of standalone, and that was the sort of excuse to do it. So I spent about 6 months, 9 months developing the workshop system as a kind of first prototype. Made 15 of them. We used them at that retreat, we used them at that event. spent another 6 months kind of polishing it and fixing the things I got wrong. And then we launched the system last November or December, I think. And the idea of it was to have something that was kind of all in one. It was something you could physically pick up and carry around, but that was kind of as flexible as it possibly could be. So it was the idea that it is modular in that you have to patch it to make anything. It can do lots and lots and lots of different things. There's at least about 60,000 ways to patch it before you even start moving the knobs around.
You've done the calculations.
I wrote a script that looked for patches that were sort of plausible, so they should be able to make a noise. And they're actually fascinating. Somebody bought it and is part of the community of users, took a bunch of those patches and published them in a ring-bound book that you can order, a kind of print-on-demand thing. And it's amazing. You kind of open it and you get confronted with this patch that the machine has generated, and it's really, particularly if you're kind of experienced in modular and synths, you look at it and you're like, why on earth has it done that? Why would you possibly do that? You might have like 4 or 5 modules all linking together and going into the kind of CV on the envelope, and then nothing else. And you kind of have to look at it and figure out, well, is there a way to make this make a sound? And there almost always is.
Yeah.
I found it's really funny things like you'll have a filter with nothing plugged into it, so immediately you just turn the resonance up to kind of turn it on, and it's those kind of things that makes you think very differently about how you use something like this and how you understand all those things. So for somebody who's very kind of confident in this world, and you've done it a lot, those sorts of techniques of kind of the constraints and weird random patching are quite fun. But I've also found for people who are very inexperienced, people who've just never used something like this before, never seen something like this before, there are ways you can patch it in a very, very simple way that somebody can sit down and get interest out of it and fun out of it in quite a small way.
How different does the released version now look to what you took to the workshop in Cornwall?
There's not much difference to it. There's a few physical differences. The original one looked like it would fit into a Eurorack module, but actually didn't because I hadn't measured it properly. So a couple of the buttons here were arranged slightly differently. The mixer pots were much more luxuriously laid out, but it didn't actually fit in. The initial version had no volt per octave tuning. And I was like, nobody tunes their oscillators. That's like for squares. And I took it to Superbooth last year, and several people felt that people do tune their oscillators and that it was worth having something that could actually play in tune. So I figured out a way of doing that and having kind of temperature, compensated oscillators and stuff. So it's a little bit more refined. There's lots of things like that. There's a calibration system on the computer we haven't talked about that meant you could calibrate it once and swap it between all the different cards, that sort of thing. But fundamentally, it looks like the same sort of thing. And I occasionally see people on Instagram with those original prototypes, which are always very nostalgic.
Yeah. Was a lot of that time period between the original system and the released version, I guess, spent optimizing for production? Is that something you account for in your designs at this point, or?
It's partly that I was doing that really all the way through. It was really kind of cost optimized all the way through. I was like, I want this to be
attainable.
£200, £300, £400, £500. I don't want it to be £600, £700, £800, £900. And it's really funny when you're doing that. I remember when I was deep in designing it, I'd be like, there's this component this big that costs 1.2 pence, but there's another component that costs 0.3 pence. Can I make it work with the 0.3 pence component rather than that fancy 1.2 pence component? And you find yourself in this kind of total, it's similar when you design circuit boards, you're kind of zoomed into these tiny components. And for you, it feels like big and important, and then you zoom out and you see it's these tiny little kind of grains of salt you're moving around. So in terms of getting it as affordable as it could be, there was a lot of that all the way through. There's things like the analog parts all use straightforward, widely available components. So the oscillators are kind of 70s style transistor, op-amp, OTA oscillators, which sound nice, but specifically they don't use kind of these new chip oscillators that might go out of business, might stay in business, those sorts of things. So what I wanted it to be just kind of cheap and easy to accessible and reliable. And there are a couple of components that are a little bit weird, but generally speaking, it's trying to keep it as simple and kind of honest and straightforward as it could be.
I ask that just as I can see not any direct reference to individuals, but when you break out of building individual modules, almost just when you're designing an instrument, it easily snowballing in cost, and then building it becomes a really difficult thing to do.
Yeah. And a lot of it is how do you possibly simplify it enough? So like the oscillators, I had an oscillator that's similar design I made years ago. I literally cut off chunks of that. I cut off the bit that did PWM. I cut off the bit that did sawtooth, I think, to see if it would actually physically work with all those bits chopped off it to make it as simple as it could be. Things like the slopes, which are these kind of envelope, sort of LFO type things. How simple and small can you possibly make that for it still to be useful? And that I found a really interesting part to say, how can you make it as dense as it possibly can? I mean, one example of that, there's this part here, which is these 4 buttons and 4 voltages, which is, I wanted something you could control and kind of play. I didn't want to use a computer. I didn't want to a proper, like a microcontroller and a quantizer or any of those things, but I wanted something you could press that would make different voltages. And that's just a very, very simple circuit with a bunch of op-amps and resistors that is very difficult to explain because it works in a kind of weird, random way, but is quite useful to play. It's kind of, it's done for me what it was meant to do. So you can control a bunch of things, you can bash these buttons, and you can make the whole system shift quite quickly, but in a tiny space with very kind of minimal sort of circuits and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. I guess as well, there's the filter is based on the Humpback from God's Box, which is something Steve also looked after at Thonk. That speaks to that just being efficient and you maybe don't have to design a filter if you don't have that in the back catalogue.
It was exactly that. I had originally designed it with a sort of vaguely kind of modified MS-20 filter. Didn't sound very good, didn't work very well. I just thought, a big part of it was collaboration as well. It was saying, I don't need to do all this myself. Mm-hmm. I can reach out to other people and use their ideas, share with them. They get royalties from it when it sells, that sort of thing. So that idea of collaborating. When I was designing the front panel in the past, I've always designed my own front panels. With this, I was just staring at it and it looked horrible, everything I did. And I was like, this is such a difficult, graphic design challenge, and I'm not a graphic designer at all. And just looked up the person who I know, who's the best typographer I know, who's a designer in London. Said to him, well, can I come and have lunch with you and ask you some questions? And he kind of understood that actually I was saying, can you just take this and go and make it for me, which he did. And he's a musician, but not in any of this kind of world. So he enjoyed doing it, I think. But it was that was a really interesting process as well, because the first thing he sent back, which is essentially what you see here, to me it looked really weird. It's like it wasn't what I would have designed. It wasn't something I initially felt kind of comfortable. So it took me a few weeks of kind of living with it to go, actually, yeah, this is right. He's solved an awful lot of the problems that I had when I was trying to do it. So that business of collaborating, of kind of reaching out to people, and then, it's not just me, this at all. It's a kind of group of people.
it's a real skill to develop to know when to hand things off and when to let go.
Well, it's laziness.
Well, and that's not what I was saying.
I am attempting to do it in the laziest, quickest, cheapest way possible.
Right, that's fair. Was the goal with this early on, because this is available as an assembled product, which is the first for anything music, Thing Modular, potentially a first for anything that Thonk are looking after as well.
Yeah.
Was that always the goal, this being a kind of desktop system?
It's been really sort of back and forth on that. So initially I was like, I'll make a DIY version because I understand that and that's sort of the community I'm in, and obviously that's what Thonk are used to. And then I'll make one in a kind of fancy steel case and we'll sell it for more money.
The premium one.
And we'll sell it at Signal Sounds and whatever. Since then, I'm much less certain about that as a path. So we sell ready-made ones through Thonk because lots of people asked for ready-made ones.
I wondered if it was peer pressure.
It's exactly that. So people asked and said, can I buy them ready-made? And Steve, who runs Thonk, said, well, why don't we just make some? And so there's, I think, somebody at Thonk who essentially now makes these all day long. And you're just buying an assembled kit. It's not a different thing at all. And then Schneider's Keller and Denmark Street asked for one, which for me was so exciting as somebody who's lived in London for years. And Denmark Street is the street of all music gear shops in London. And to have a thing I designed sat in a little shelf in the corner of a branch of Schneider's Laden in Berlin was such an amazing kind of, I was very proud of that, very sort of privilege. They wanted to sell ready-made ones, so we said, well, let's get somebody at Thonk to ready-make some. So it's been and we've now got them in LA at Perfect Circuits. We've just got a batch going to Schneider's HQ in Berlin. But it was very much just, we will then make them if that's what people want.
The nice thing about seeing it in Schneider's Keller is that they're out for people to play with.
Yeah,
I've
absolutely.
seen Ed kind of guiding people. And
I've made a little poster that kind of shows people a simple patch to use. His description was actually what happens is people go into Schneider's Keller and often one person in the group is going and playing on all the synthesizers and then somebody else is sitting in the corner, whether it's a kind of partner or a child or whatever. And he was like, one of these, that'd be quite fun for them to play. So that was my kind of goal, was something that the non-specialist could just pick up and play with.
What was the idea with the kind of computer section, if you like, with the card system and...
So that again, so for those who haven't seen it, I do have a card with me. So the bit on the left, all this layer is analog. This part here is digital. This is a computer. And you put one of these little program cards in there. I don't know if there's anything on this one. And then you press the button. There isn't anything on that one. And it loads the program, and it can be anything. So when you buy it, you get a reverb card. You plug it in, it turns into a reverb with a couple of controls. You get a Turing machine card that turns it into a sequencer. You get a MIDI card that turns into a USB MIDI interface. And there is no kind of firmware, there's no preset thing in that part of it. And this, again, is because I'm not very good at writing code. I'm not confident about writing code. I don't like doing it. So I wanted something that other people could do, other people could kind of get involved in. So very early on, I built a kind of developer kit with just that module by itself, reached out to people I knew, sent that to people, and people, the sort of community started around that, developing them. I don't know if Chris is in the audience somewhere. I think he's probably gone to a different session. A guy called Chris Johnson, who's been very instrumental in that. And that has really now led, with these out in the world, there's a community of people who are writing these cards, sharing them, and that's been amazing, been really fascinating.
So people doing things on that, I presume, that you maybe hadn't expected to start with?
There are people doing things on that I was convinced were impossible. Okay. So there are specific things that I thought, like, it doesn't have very much memory, the thing. So I was like, I remember a year ago, I was talking to Alex Mylar, going, well, it definitely can't do looping. You won't be able to record a minute of audio in it. And then somebody came up and said, I've worked out a way to record a minute of audio into it. So there's a really nice now kind of tape loop card that you can put into it. And that has been just fascinating. Like last week, somebody on the community, on the Discord, said, I really wanted a kind of utilities thing like a make noise, no coast. It's got various little utilities things. So I built a card that does that. And you can download that from the site and drop it onto the blank card that comes to your system. And so people are just sort of, it's a small subset of the audience. So we've sold probably 500 since this time last year. And there's probably about 15, 20 people who are really engaged in writing cards. And there's about 3 or 4 people who've written several really good, really interesting, really impressive cards for it. And I think that's the right sort of ratio. There's probably 20, 30 people who've dabbled with it and had a go. And that I think is right, because I never wanted it to be just for programmers to make stuff. I want an audience for those programmers stuff as well.
Yeah, everyone benefits from their work. And if there's a Discord community as well, is there a kind of system? Are people requesting things almost?
There's a bit of that, yeah. That definitely happens. There's kind of ideas. One extraordinary thing that happened just before Christmas last year, Chris, who I mentioned, during December, published a new program card every day in December.
Wow.
And I was talking about it last night, he did hoover up an awful lot of the low-hanging fruit. So one day it was attenuator, which is obviously not a particularly difficult thing to write in a program card, but it's got a fantastic dual delay, it's got a really nice kind of chorus, it's got a chord generator. So he kind of ticked off lots of the kind of very basic things that you might want to do. And I think that's been good because it's meant people do a lot of much weirder things. So there's a really nice kind of granular thing that this guy June put out recently, which is called Sheep, because it's a bit like clouds. It's kind of white and fluffy, but it isn't actually that. And what I like about what he's doing is it's very much integrated into the rest of the system. So it's very patchable. It's not like a program where you press the button and it does something. It's got a lot of ins and outs and is a really interesting and kind of musical approach to that.
Is that inspired? Do you think that's going to inspire people to maybe build their own instruments as well? Is it becoming a platform where these people are maybe building up enough confidence and experience?
I think potentially. One of the things I'm really interested in doing, and if anyone here has any contacts to how to do something like this, I think it'd be fantastic to do a kind of workshop or some kind of event where you get a bunch of coders together and you get a bunch of musicians together and you pair them up with one of these and give them 2 days or something to create an instrument and a piece of music that uses it kind of at the same time. Because you can do things quite quickly with it, and particularly now with AI and stuff, you can, there are people who have, and again, I'm just looking around to see if they're in the room. There are people who have taken the kind of instructions from the website about coding, dropped it into ChatGPT, and had it make working, quite gnarly and interesting, program cards without any coding themselves. Not necessarily the most polished and refined things, but interesting and weird stuff.
Yeah, that's very much a point I'd be coming from, of having to maybe just probe other people in the community of, wouldn't it be cool if it did this?
Absolutely, and I think that idea of, one of the things I felt was really important was that it's very low bar. You're just writing a bit of code and putting it there, and if it's successful, you're printing a little card, because the cards, all the design files are open for that, so you can get a bunch of cards printed in China if you want to, and you can sell them. One of my favorite cards is exactly that. A guy called Brian, who lives in Oregon, did some field recording in his backyard on a really rainy night, and he had some bits where the rain was very gentle, some bits where the rain was kind of in the middle, and some bits where the rain was really hard. He took those files, he kind of looped them and edited them and crossfaded them and built this program card that you just plug it in, you plug the audio out from it, and then the big knob at the top changes how intensely it's raining. And it's called Backyard Rain, and it's one of my favorite things. It's great for kind of demonstrating to people, just to show this is this complicated, weird-looking, intimidating modular synth and listen to it, it just makes rain. And then you say, and you can take that rain and run it through this nice filter. And so it's that idea of a very low, nobody's going to make a Eurorack module and invest months and years of their life and money to make the thing just to spit out some rain. But for this, it's a really nice, way of doing it.
Are there any upcoming workshops with the workshop system? Is this something that's kind of actively...
There's a thing in... So one of the other things I've done is put together... I've got a pack of 12 of these, like a box with 12 of them in it, which are for loan. So therefore, anyone who wants to do events or workshops can come to me and borrow them. That's been really fascinating, the things that have come from that. So next week, is he in the audience here? Mr. Computer Club? He was around earlier. He's not here. He's borrowing 12 of them for an event in Leeds in end of the month, I think. Jake, exactly. Yeah. Jake Mayhew's, he's got them. And I think he's getting some people from the local music schools to come in and do something together. A group, a sort of experimental improvisation group in South London have got a gig in a pub in November. They're borrowing 3 of them to play with together. I've got to get them back from them so they can go to Jake, and then they're going back to them, but that's fine. That pack went to the Brit School for 2 weeks for their sort of sixth formers were using them. So doing that has made it really quite a low bar. If somebody's got an idea and says, could I get a bunch of these? We can do that. I was up in Whitstable the other week with Coastal Electronauts, did a kind of day there. So there's not a specific big workshop coming up focused on this, but there will be more events. And as I said, if you're interested, do get in touch.
So you're at a point, now this is out there and things are developing and the community's building itself, where you would maybe want to build something else of this size in desktop format? Do you want a palette cleansing? You've just released the radio music, which is maybe this, a newer version of the radio music. Yeah. Almost like a palette cleansing simple module.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, I think one of the things that's been really interesting is a lot of the last 6 months has been not just doing electronics, it's been supporting that community, it's been documenting it, because it's such a complicated thing. Working out how do you explain it to people is a kind of constant ongoing thing. So how do you, and then supporting the people developing cards. I'm going to do a sort of second batch of those cards where it's 4 cards from that community kind of printed up and sold as a bundle through Thonk and things, and that will require sort of documentation stuff. But yes, I've just done, as I said, radio music, which was a module I did in 2014, I think, which was the first digital module I did. It's a sampler that is pretending to be a radio. So you can put an SD card in, it can play really long files or really short, sort of drum loops. You just turn a big knob at the top to choose the file you want. That went out of production because the chip it used wasn't available anymore. So over the last sort of 6 months or so, have been doing a new version of that, completely different sort of hardware, but exactly the same sort of form factor. It's much better sounding. It's cleaner. It's faster. It's got really nice pitch shift and things inside it. But yeah, I think you're quite right. A really simple, nice, weird analog module that nobody will want would be perfect. Something that I'd send, ring up Steve at Thonk and he'd be like, maybe we'll do 20 of them. Oh, Chris, you are here. I didn't see you. This is Chris, who's very much involved in writing a lot of the code for this and helped on radio music.
I used the radio music came back to mind, as well as seeing it earlier at the booth. The Backyard Rain card. That's very much how I ended up using radio music as my noise source. Just a bank of analog noise colours, noises from various synthesizers, Foley recordings. Yeah. It just became this really lovely, easy to use. And that idea of scanning through a radio, of live playing, looping audio.
Yeah, I think it was an interface that's simple enough that it just brings different sounds and textures. One of the other really nice things with that radio music process, because it was clearly going to be a lot more hi-fi. The previous one was not hi-fi at all. Mm-hmm. It had a noise floor of about 60 decibels or something, if that. The new one is much cleaner, much crisper, much nicer sounding, which means you can put in kind of field recordings and little rustly textures, and it works really well. So when I realized that, I thought, well, who could do a sound bank for this? There's a guy called Douglas Murray who came to the original Disky workshop where these were first used. And he's a professional, he's a Hollywood sound recordist and has been for 50 years. He's just retired. And he worked on things like Twin Peaks and Planet of the Apes. And I said to him, can you just do a bank of stuff? I don't have a real brief. I don't want it to be too literal. I don't want sounds of animals and then sounds of whatever. Just collect stuff together. And he was very keen to do this. He was a bit unsure about how to structure and how to arrange it, but he's got about 1.5 terabytes of his life's work of recordings from all the work he's done. And about 2 or 3 weeks ago, he just got back in touch and said, "Oh, I've made this." And it's the most extraordinary thing I've ever heard, because it's all absolutely beautifully recorded, because that's what he's done, and he really, really knows how to record things well. And it has folders like the first folder says 0 chimps. I was like, why on earth? What on earth is the first folder of chimps? And obviously he worked on Planet of the Apes, so it's his audio research for doing Planet of the Apes, and it's just this folder of jungle noises and chimpanzees talking. Mm-hmm. It's just amazing. And then you turn on the next folder, it's called cheetahs. It's like, what the hell is that going to be? It's cheetahs purring, 20 samples of them. Just these massive, that didn't really come out. But and again, and it's now got fantastic kind of speed, very smooth kind of tape style speed shifting on it. So you kind of slow that down and run that through. It's amazing. Mm. So that again is a real example of that kind of collaboration. Now, it used to be I would try and do all this stuff myself. Now I do the kind of hardware. I work with Chris on the software, and I work with Doug on the sound bank, and it's an awful lot better than if I was trying to do any of those things by myself.
So it sounds like the future holds more of everything.
Yeah, probably.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
We'll leave it there. Thank you, everybody.